The autumn sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty settlement of Copper Ridge, Arizona Territory, casting long shadows across the makeshift gambling den that served as both saloon and general store. Samuel McKenzie sat on a custom-built stool at the poker table, his weathered hands gripping cards that seemed oversized against his small frame. At 3 feet 8 inches tall, Sam had learned early that respect in the frontier came not from height, but from grit, and he'd carved out a decent living with his 100-head cattle ranch through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to read both cattle and men. "I'll see your 20 steers, McKenzie, and raise you something more interesting," drawled Jake Morrison, the territorial land commissioner, whose bloated belly strained against his sweat-stained vest. Morrison's eyes gleamed with malicious intent as he leaned back in his chair, tobacco juice staining his gray beard. "You think you're so smart, running that little spread of yours, but I got something that'll test just how clever you really are." Sam's jaw tightened as he studied Morrison's florid face. The man had been needling him all evening, making snide comments about little men with big ideas and how the Apache were getting restless over water rights near Sam's property. The other players, 2 drifters and a freight wagon driver, watched with the hungry anticipation of men who smelled blood in the water. "What kind of raise you talking about, Morrison?" Sam's voice carried the quiet authority that had earned him grudging respect among the territory's cattlemen, despite his stature. Morrison's grin widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "I got word from Chief Nalnish that his people need supplies for winter. Seems his daughter, tallest Apache woman I ever did see, nearly 6 feet of pure warrior blood. Well, she needs a husband. Apache custom, you understand. Now, if you lose this hand, you marry that squaw and provide for her band through the winter. Your cattle, your land, everything goes to keeping them fed." The saloon fell silent, except for the buzz of flies and the distant lowing of cattle. Sam felt his face flush hot with anger and humiliation. Morrison was betting on the certainty that Sam would fold rather than risk such a fate, knowing full well that the cultural divide and his own physical limitations would make such a union a mockery. "And if I win?" Sam asked, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. "You win my water rights to Apache Creek, the ones that border your property. Legal claim, government-backed, make you the biggest landowner in 3 counties. Morrison spat into the spittoon beside his chair. "But we both know you ain't got the sand for this bet, McKenzie. Little men should stick to little wagers." Sam's mind raced. Apache Creek water rights would triple his herd capacity and secure his ranch's future for decades. But the alternative, he'd heard tales of Aiyana, Chief Nalnish's daughter, a warrior woman who stood nearly 2 feet taller than him, known for her skill with bow and rifle, her fierce protection of her people, and her complete disdain for white settlers. The Apache had been increasingly hostile as drought forced competition for water sources, and any alliance would be fraught with danger from both sides. The other players shifted nervously. Outside, a dust devil whirled across the main street, rattling windows and sending chickens squawking for cover. Sam looked at his cards again. 3 aces, a strong hand but not unbeatable. Morrison's confident smirk suggested he held something powerful, maybe a straight or flush. "You're on, Morrison," Sam said quietly, pushing his deed and cattle certificates to the center of the table. "But I want witnesses, and I want it in writing. This bet stands legal and binding." Morrison's eyes widened slightly. He'd expected Sam to fold, but his greed overcame his surprise, and he quickly scrawled out the terms on a piece of paper, signing it with a flourish. The other players signed as witnesses, their hands shaking slightly, as they realized they were documenting what could be either the making or destruction of 2 lives. "Full house, aces over 10s, Morrison declared triumphantly, spreading his cards across the scarred wooden table. Sam stared at the cards, his heart pounding. He'd been beaten by a single rank. His 3 aces meant nothing against Morrison's full house. The silence stretched like a taut rope until Sam slowly placed his cards face down on the table. "Looks like I'm getting married," he said, his voice carrying a bitter edge that cut through the stifling air. Morrison's laughter boomed through the saloon, but it held no joy, only the cruel satisfaction of a man who'd just engineered another's downfall. "Better learn some Apache words fast, McKenzie. Chief Nalnish expects you at his camp by week's end, or he'll consider it an insult to his daughter's honor, and you know how Apache handle insults." As Sam walked out into the blazing afternoon sun, the weight of his decisions settled on his shoulders like a yoke. Behind him, Morrison's laughter continued, mixing with the whispered conversations of men who'd just witnessed a decent rancher gamble away his freedom. The dusty street of Copper Ridge stretched before him, leading toward the distant mountains where the Apache made their home, and toward a fate he could never have imagined when he'd first claimed his stake in this harsh, unforgiving land. 3 days later, Sam McKenzie guided his pack mule through the rocky terrain leading into Apache territory, his modified saddle creaking with each step of his mare, Belle. The morning air carried the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching day. Behind him, a small wagon loaded with winter supplies, flour, blankets, coffee, and salt, represented his offering to Chief Nalnish's band, though Sam knew it was barely enough to fulfill the marriage bargain Morrison had trapped him into. His ranch foreman, Miguel Santos, an aging Mexican vaquero who'd worked the territory for 30 years, rode alongside him with obvious reluctance. "Patron, this is madness," Miguel muttered, adjusting his weathered sombrero against the climbing sun. "Apache warriors don't forget, and they don't forgive. You marry this woman, you become part of their struggles. The cavalry won't see you as white anymore, and the Apache, they may never see you as one of them." Sam's jaw tightened as he navigated Belle around a cluster of prickly pear cactus. "Maybe so, Miguel, but a man's word is his bond. I made that bet, and I lost fair and square. Besides," he added with bitter humor, "what choice do I have? Morrison made sure the whole territory knows about this. If I back out now, I'll be branded a coward and a welcher. My cattle business would be finished." The sun climbed higher, turning the desert floor into a shimmering furnace. They passed through a narrow canyon where ancient petroglyphs marked Apache presence going back generations, spirals, hunting scenes, and warrior symbols carved into the red rock walls. Miguel crossed himself nervously as they rode beneath the watchful eyes of stone sentinels. "Tell me about her," Sam said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Aiyana, what do you know?" Miguel spat dust from his mouth before answering. "She is formidable, Patron. Nearly 6 feet tall, they say, with arms strong enough to draw a warbow that most men cannot even bend. Her father, Chief Nalnish, trained her as a warrior when her brothers died in the cavalry raids 5 years past. She speaks English, learned it from a missionary woman before the Apache drove the mission out. But Aiyana, she hates the white man's world. Lost her promised husband to soldiers at Canyon de Chelly." Sam absorbed this information grimly. He was riding toward marriage with a woman who had every reason to despise him and his kind, a warrior who could snap him like a dry branch if she chose. The absurdity of his situation would have been laughable if the consequences weren't so deadly serious. As they crested a ridge, the Apache camp spread below them in a protected valley, where a spring fed cottonwood trees and provided sweet grass for horses. Wickiups dotted the landscape like scattered stones, their curved frames covered with brush and hides. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and Sam could see women working over drying racks laden with meat, while children played among the horses. It looked peaceful, almost pastoral, but Sam knew that Apache warriors could materialize from the surrounding rocks within minutes if they perceived a threat. A single rider emerged from the camp and rode toward them at a measured pace. As the figure drew closer, Sam's breath caught in his throat. The rider was unmistakably feminine despite her warrior's bearing, and she was indeed tall, even mounted. Her presence commanded attention. Her long black hair was braided with feathers and silver ornaments, and she wore a combination of traditional Apache dress and practical leather that spoke of both heritage and warfare. "That's her," Miguel whispered. "Aiyana, daughter of the wind, they call her." Sam straightened in his saddle as Aiyana approached, her dark eyes assessing him with the cold calculation of a predator evaluating potential prey. She rode a magnificent pinto stallion that danced beneath her with barely contained energy, and Sam noticed the bow and quiver slung across her back, along with a rifle in a beaded scabbard. She stopped 20 feet away and spoke in accented but clear English, her voice carrying across the desert air like a blade. "So, you are the small white man who thinks he can buy an Apache woman with a wagon of supplies and a gambling debt." Sam met her gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite the obvious contempt in her voice. "I'm Sam McKenzie. I came to honor the agreement made with your father. Not because I think I can buy you, but because my word means something to me." Aiyana's expression didn't soften, but Sam caught a flicker of something, surprise perhaps, in her dark eyes. She urged her horse closer, looking down at him from her considerable height advantage. "My father says you lost everything in this bet. Your land, your cattle, your freedom. What kind of man gambles away his life on the turn of a card? The same kind of fool who thought he could outwit a man like Morrison, Sam replied honestly. But I made my choice, and now I'm here to face the consequences. I won't pretend this is what either of us wanted, but I'll do my part to make it work. For a long moment, Aiyana studied him in silence. Around them, the desert held its breath, waiting. Finally, she turned her horse and began riding toward the camp. "Follow me, husband," she said, her voice carrying a complex mix of resignation and challenge. "My father wishes to speak with you before the ceremony. Try not to disappoint him the way you have disappointed me." As they rode into the Apache camp, Sam felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, some curious, others openly hostile. Children stopped their play to stare at the strange white man who barely reached their mother's shoulders, while warriors emerged from their wiki-ups to assess this unexpected addition to their band. Chief Nalnish waited beside the central fire, a tall, dignified man whose weathered face bore the marks of countless battles and hard decisions. As Sam dismounted and approached, he realized that his life as he'd known it was truly over. Whatever came next would be forged in the crucible of two cultures that had more reasons to distrust each other than to find common ground. Chief Nalnish stood beside the sacred fire, his imposing figure draped in ceremonial robes, adorned with eagle feathers and turquoise beads that caught the flickering light. His weathered face, marked by decades of warfare against encroaching settlers and cavalry, regarded Sam with the measured assessment of a man who had learned to read character in the split second between life and death. Behind him, the Apache band had gathered in a wide circle, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed hostility. Samuel McKenzie, the chief, spoke in heavily accented English, his deep voice carrying the authority of generations of leadership. "You come to my people not through honor or love, but through the foolishness of white man's gambling. Yet you come when you could have fled to distant territories. This speaks of something. Tell me, small warrior, why should I give my daughter to a man who cannot even protect his own land?" Sam removed his hat, his weathered hands trembling slightly despite his efforts to maintain composure. The entire Apache band watched him, and he could feel Aiyana's burning gaze from where she stood among the women, her tall frame rigid with suppressed anger. "Chief Nalnish, I won't pretend this is how any of us wanted it to happen, but I gave my word, and among my people a man who breaks his word isn't worth the ground he stands on. I may have lost my land and cattle, but I didn't lose my integrity." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Several warriors exchanged glances, and Sam caught fragments of Apache conversation he couldn't understand. The chief raised his hand for silence, then walked slowly around Sam, studying him like a trader evaluating a horse. "You are small, even for a white man," Nalnish observed bluntly. "My daughter stands taller than most of our warriors. She can shoot the eye from an eagle at 200 paces, track a deer through solid rock, and has counted coup on cavalry soldiers. What can you offer her except the burden of your presence?" Sam straightened, his blue eyes meeting the chief's unflinching stare. "I can offer her respect, Chief. I built my ranch from nothing, working land that other men said couldn't support cattle. I learned to read weather, track water, and survive in country that's killed stronger men than me. I may not be tall, but I'm not weak. And I understand something about being different, about having to prove yourself every day in a world that judges you before you even speak." For the first time, Aiyana's expression shifted slightly, though whether toward interest or deeper contempt, Sam couldn't tell. Chief Nalnish completed his circle and stood again before the sacred fire. "My daughter has refused 17 Apache warriors who sought her hand," the chief continued. "She says none were worthy of her strength. Now the spirits bring us this strange arrangement. Perhaps there is purpose in it." He gestured toward Aiyana, who stepped forward with the fluid grace of a born warrior. "Daughter, speak. Will you accept this union and the responsibilities it brings?" Aiyana's dark eyes locked onto Sam's, and for a moment the entire camp seemed to hold its breath. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the desert air. "I will accept it, Father, because our people need the supplies this marriage brings, and because refusing would bring dishonor to our agreements with the whites. But know this, small man," she turned to address Sam directly. "I do not marry you from choice or affection. I marry you from duty. You will find me a wife in name only, until you prove yourself worthy of more." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Sam had ever witnessed. Apache traditions wove together ancient ritual and practical necessity as the band prepared for a union that would bind not just two individuals, but potentially two ways of life. The medicine man, an ancient figure whose face resembled carved leather, chanted prayers while burning sage and sweetgrass that filled the air with aromatic smoke. Sam and Aiyana were directed to stand on opposite sides of the fire, while the elder women brought forth ceremonial items, a blanket woven with symbols of protection, ears of corn representing fertility and abundance, and a water gourd signifying the life-giving force that sustained all things in the harsh desert. The medicine man spoke rapidly in Apache, his words rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. "He says the spirits are confused by this union," Miguel translated quietly from where he stood among the observers, a small white rancher and a tall Apache warrior woman. "But confusion can bring wisdom, if both parties seek understanding rather than victory." As the ceremony progressed, Sam found himself studying Aiyana's profile in the firelight. Her features were sharp and proud, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that spoke of determination and courage. She stood nearly 1.5 feet taller than him, her warrior's bearing making the disparity in their sizes even more pronounced, yet something in her posture suggested she was as uncomfortable with this situation as he was. The climax of the ceremony came when Chief Nalnish joined their hands over the sacred fire. Aiyana's fingers were long and strong, calloused from years of handling weapons and working leather, and Sam felt the power in her grip. She could crush his hand without effort if she chose. Instead, she held it firmly but without malice, her dark eyes meeting his with something that might have been resignation, or perhaps the beginning of grudging respect. "By the laws of my people and the agreement witnessed by the spirits, you are now husband and wife," Chief Nalnish declared. "May you find in each other what the desert teaches, that strength comes not from size alone, but from the ability to endure, adapt, and survive together what neither could face alone." As the ceremony concluded and the band dispersed to prepare for the feast, Sam found himself standing awkwardly beside his new wife, neither of them quite certain what to say or do next. The reality of their situation settled around them like dust after a windstorm. Two strangers, bound together by circumstance, facing an uncertain future in a land where survival depended on trust, and trust had to be earned one day at a time. 2 weeks into their marriage, Sam and Aiyana had settled into a routine of polite distance and practical cooperation that satisfied neither of them but kept the peace within the Apache camp. Their shared wickiup, constructed specially for the Union, stood at the edge of the village where the chief had positioned it, close enough to be part of the community, but separate enough to acknowledge the unusual nature of their arrangement. Sam had proven surprisingly useful, despite the initial skepticism of the Apache warriors. His years of ranching had taught him to read weather patterns with uncanny accuracy, and he'd correctly predicted the early arrival of autumn storms that allowed the band to move their horses to higher ground before flash floods swept through their usual grazing areas. Still, he felt the constant weight of being an outsider, watched and judged with every action. Aiyana maintained her warrior duties, leading hunting parties and scouting expeditions, while treating Sam with cool courtesy that never quite crossed into warmth. She spoke to him in clipped sentences, shared meals in silence, and slept on her own blankets on the opposite side of their dwelling. Yet Sam had begun to notice small gestures. She always ensured he received his share of fresh meat from the hunt, and she'd quietly adjusted the wickiup's construction to accommodate his shorter stature without making it obvious to others. The fragile balance of their coexistence shattered on a crisp October morning when Miguel rode into camp with news that drained the color from Sam's face. "Patron, you must come quickly," the old vaquero gasped, his horse lathered with sweat from a hard ride. "Morrison has filed claims on your water rights. He's brought in 30 head of his own cattle and dammed up Apache Creek. Says since you defaulted on the marriage agreement by abandoning your ranch, the water rights revert to him." Sam's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't abandon anything. I honored the bet exactly as stated. Sigh, but Morrison, he has the territorial judge in his pocket. They say you must return to defend your claim in person, or lose everything by default. But Patron," Miguel's voice dropped to an urgent whisper, "there are rumors. People say Morrison hired men from Tucson, gunfighters who don't ask questions about their work." Aiyana had been listening from where she sat repairing a bridle, her hands never pausing in their work, but her attention focused on every word. Now she stood, her tall frame casting a long shadow in the morning sun. "This Morrison seeks to steal what is rightfully yours through treachery," she said, her voice carrying a cold anger that made Sam look at her sharply. "It's not your concern," Sam replied, though without conviction. "This is white man's business, settled by white man's law." "Is it?" Aiyana challenged, stepping closer. "These water rights you speak of, they border our traditional hunting grounds. If this Morrison takes them and brings more cattle, more settlers, what happens to my people's access to the sacred springs?" This becomes Apache business very quickly. Chief Nalnish emerged from his wiki-up, having overheard the conversation. His weathered face was grim as he assessed the situation. "My daughter speaks truth. We have watched Morrison's men cutting fence and driving off game. They show no respect for the agreements your government made with our people." Sam felt the weight of conflicting loyalties pressing down on him. "Even if I go back, what can I do? Morrison has money, influence, and hired guns. I'm one man with a dubious claim and a lot of enemies who'd be happy to see me fail." "You would not be one man," Aiyana said quietly, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity he'd never seen before. "Apache law says that when two people marry, their fights become shared fights. Your enemy has become my enemy." The implications of her words sent a chill through Sam. "You're talking about warfare. Apache warriors attacking white settlers. That would bring the cavalry down on your people like a hammer." "Perhaps," Chief Nalnish said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps there are other ways for Apache justice to work alongside white man's law. My daughter is wise in the ways of both peoples. She could help you reclaim what is yours without bringing soldiers to our camp." Over the next 3 days, an unlikely alliance took shape. Aiyana revealed depths of strategic thinking that impressed even the Apache war leaders, while Sam provided detailed knowledge of Morrison's operations, the legal system, and the geography of the disputed territory. They pored over crude maps drawn in the dirt, planned approach routes, and identified Morrison's weaknesses. "He thinks like a white man," Aiyana observed during one of their planning sessions. "He sees only what is in front of him, not what moves in the shadows. His hired guns are good at frightening farmers and shopkeepers, but they have never faced Apache tactics." "And what exactly are Apache tactics?" Sam asked, genuinely curious. Aiyana's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Patience. We watch, we wait. We learn our enemy's patterns. Then we strike where he is weakest, when he least expects it, not with overwhelming force, but with precise action that achieves maximum result." As they prepared for the journey back to Sam's ranch, he found himself seeing Aiyana in an entirely new light. Her warrior's training extended far beyond physical prowess. She possessed a tactical mind that could analyze complex situations and devise solutions that escaped him entirely. More importantly, she had chosen to stand with him despite having every reason to let him face his troubles alone. On their final night before departure, as they sat by their small fire outside the wiki-up, Aiyana spoke into the silence that had become comfortable rather than awkward. "You asked me once what I could see in this marriage. I begin to understand that the question should be what we can build together, that neither could build alone." Sam looked across the fire at his wife. Truly his wife now, he realized, not just in ceremony but in shared purpose. "Morrison thinks he's broken me by forcing this marriage. Maybe he's about to learn that some things, when they're broken and put back together, become stronger than they were before." The desert wind carried the scent of coming rain as they prepared for a confrontation that would test not only their newfound partnership, but the very possibility of understanding between two peoples who had more reasons to be enemies than allies. Dawn broke cold and clear over Apache Creek as Sam and Aiyana crouched behind a rocky outcropping, watching Morrison's men go about their morning routine. The illegal dam Morrison had constructed blocked the natural flow of water, creating a stagnant pond that served his cattle while cutting off the downstream springs that had sustained both Sam's ranch and the Apache hunting grounds for generations. 3 hired gunmen lounged around their campfire, their rifles within easy reach, but their attention focused on coffee and hardtack. Morrison himself wouldn't arrive until later with the territorial judge for the official inspection that would legitimize his theft, but his men had been left to ensure no interference occurred. "The one with the scarred face is their leader," Aiyana whispered, her breath visible in the crisp air. "He watches the others, makes the decisions. Remove him, and the others will lose their courage quickly." Sam nodded, checking his pocket watch. In 2 hours, Miguel would arrive with the territorial marshal they'd secretly contacted in Tucson, a man known for his integrity who'd agreed to investigate reports of illegal damming and water theft. But first, they needed to neutralize Morrison's guns and gather evidence that couldn't be dismissed or destroyed. "Remember," Sam said quietly, "we need them alive to testify." No killing unless they force it. Aiyana's dark eyes flashed with grim humor. Apache warriors are taught precision, husband. We waste neither arrows nor lives unnecessarily. They moved like shadows across the broken terrain, Aiyana's lifetime of training in desert warfare making her nearly invisible even in daylight, while Sam's intimate knowledge of his own land let him anticipate every rock and ravine. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Divide the gunmen's attention, capture their leader, and hold the position until the marshal arrived with legal authority to arrest Morrison for water theft and conspiracy. The first gunman never knew what hit him. Aiyana's bow sang softly, and a blunt-tipped arrow designed for stunning rather than killing struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle flying. Before his companions could react, Sam had emerged from behind their supply wagon, his own rifle trained on the scarred leader. "Don't move," Sam commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man defending his home. "You're trespassing on my land and interfering with legal water rights." The scarred gunman, a lean man with cold eyes and calloused hands, smiled mockingly. "Well, well, the little rancher came home after all. Morrison said you'd run off to play Indian with your squaw wife. Where is she, McKenzie? Hiding behind the rocks like a proper savage?" "I'm right here," Aiyana said calmly, stepping into view with another arrow nocked and drawn. At nearly 6 feet tall, she towered over all of them, her warriors bearing making her presence fill the entire camp. "And I suggest you speak respectfully of my husband, if you wish to keep your scalp." The third gunman, a nervous young man who clearly hadn't signed up for fighting Apache warriors, dropped his weapon and raised his hands. "I ain't getting paid enough for this," he stammered. Morrison never said nothing about fighting Indians, but the scarred leader was made of sterner stuff. His hand inched toward his holstered pistol as he calculated odds and distances. "You think you got us figured out, McKenzie? Morrison's got this whole territory sewn up tight. Even if you take us, he'll just claim we were protecting his legal property from Apache raiders. Your redskin wife just gave him the perfect excuse to call in the cavalry." "That might be a problem," Sam admitted, never wavering in his aim, "if Morrison was going to be around to tell his story." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the creek bed. But instead of Morrison and the corrupt judge, Miguel appeared leading a small group that included the territorial marshal, an army lieutenant, and 2 soldiers. Behind them, riding with quiet dignity, came Chief Nalnish and 3 Apache warriors. The scarred gunman's confidence evaporated as he realized the magnitude of the trap that had been laid for Morrison. "What the hell is this?" "Justice," said Marshal Williams, a weathered man whose reputation for honesty had made him enemies among the territory's more corrupt officials. "We've been investigating complaints about illegal water diversions and the harassment of Apache peoples. Your boss Morrison made the mistake of trying to bribe the wrong federal judge." The lieutenant, a young man named Carson, who'd clearly never seen Apache warriors up close, looked nervously at Chief Nalnish. "Are we sure about this alliance, Marshal? These are the same Apache who've been raiding settlements." "These Apache," Chief Nalnish said in carefully measured English, "have been defending their people from men who break agreements and steal water that belongs to all living things. My son-in-law and daughter have shown us that some white people still understand honor." Over the next hour, the carefully laid trap snapped shut around Morrison's operation. The dam was revealed to be not only illegal, but constructed with shoddy materials that would have failed catastrophically during the spring floods, potentially killing dozens downstream. Morrison's hired guns, faced with federal charges and the prospect of Apache justice, readily testified about their employer's other illegal activities: cattle rustling, claim jumping, and the systematic intimidation of smaller ranchers. When Morrison himself arrived with his pet judge, expecting to find a compliant scene ready for rubber stamp approval, he instead found his men in custody and his entire operation under federal investigation. His florid face went pale as he realized the extent of his exposure. "This is a setup," Morrison blustered, his voice cracking with panic. "That dwarf and his savage wife have conspired against a legitimate businessman." "That dwarf," Marshal Williams said coldly, "is a legally married rancher whose water rights predate your claims by 5 years. And that savage is the daughter of a chief who's shown more honor in one morning than you've displayed in your entire career." As Morrison and his corrupt judge were led away in shackles, Sam found himself standing beside Aiyana at the edge of Apache Creek, watching the natural flow of water resume as the illegal dam was torn down. The sound of running water seemed to carry promises of renewal and hope. "So," Aiyana said, her voice carrying a warmth he'd never heard before. "What happens now, husband? Do we return to your ranch and try to build something together?" Sam looked up at his wife, his partner, his ally, his equal in all the ways that truly mattered. "I was thinking we might build something new, a place where Apache horses can graze alongside cattle, where two peoples can learn from each other instead of fighting." Morrison was right about one thing. This territory is changing. We can help decide what it changes into. Aiyana smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since their wedding day. The Apache have a saying, "A marriage is like a river. It finds its own course, but it is strongest when both banks are firm." I think, small warrior, that we have found our course at last. As the sun set over Apache Creek, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sam and Aiyana walked hand in hand toward a future neither could have imagined when they'd first stood as strangers beside a sacred fire. Behind them, Apache warriors and cavalry soldiers worked together to restore the natural flow of the creek, while ahead lay the challenging but hopeful work of building bridges between two worlds that had forgotten how to trust. The bet that had seemed like Sam's destruction had instead become the foundation of something unprecedented in the harsh frontier, a genuine partnership between peoples, built on respect, forged in adversity, and strengthened by the discovery that love, like water, finds a way to flow even through the most unlikely terrain.